Good evening from Washington. I'm Larry O'Connor, and we're gearing up now for this Wednesday's presidential debate of Republican candidates for the nomination, except for one. That would be Donald Trump. He won't be there. He'll be giving an exclusive interview to Tucker Carlson that night for some counter-programming. But the debate is important to the American electorate, and Salem News Channel will be covering it live on the scene. I'll be there, and we'll also have full coverage from Michael Gallagher, Andrew Wilkow. Make sure you tune in Wednesday night here to Salem News Channel. Joining us right now is Hogan Gidley, former National Press Secretary for President Trump and also from the 2020 presidential campaign. And he's the Vice Chair of the Center for Election Integrity. Hogan, good to see you again, sir.
Great to see you, Larry. Thanks for the time.
Well, first of all, President Trump's announcement that not only this debate, but he will not be attending any of the debates. And I understand that seems to be a wise political calculation. He's ahead by, what, 45 points now. And being on the stage could only hurt him, I suppose. So this is the smart move?
It is. If I were advising Donald Trump or his campaign, and I'm not, but if I were, they asked, I would tell them absolutely not. Under no circumstance should you step on that stage. There's a time and a place to talk to voters, and debates are a good place to do that. But this guy's up 45, 50 points. And the fact is, you'll just be a punching bag, a piñata for the rest of the crowd to kind of take shots at you and tear you down. You are the front runner by a large margin. And look, if you're high in the polls, you don't want to debate. If you're low in the polls, you always want to debate, because debates are about creating moments. They're about carving out a niche. Remember, Kamala Harris had a brief moment in that presidential debate where she called Joe Biden a segregationist and a sex criminal.
Right.
But I digress.
I forgot about that.
Had the T-shirt ready, and then within a week, she petered out. So this happens all the time where people try and create those moments. This is a whole different set of scenarios, though, because you have a former president also running for re-election at the top of the polling.
Yeah.
So why would the person be on stage? I would imagine if you're going to get to Donald Trump, you have to climb that ladder, and it's one rung at a time. And so you're going to have to try and chip it away at those who are ahead of you to get into a room where you can actually be mano a mano with Donald Trump. And so it's going to take a while. It's going to take some maneuvering, but this is the first in the long line of a series of debates. And I imagine Donald Trump will debate closer to time.
Oh, all right. Well, because his announcement was he will not do any of the debates, but that would be if it gets down to one or two. Because here's the thing, two responses to that. The first is just because he's not there doesn't mean he's not going to be a punching bag. Of course they're going to go after Donald Trump. The difference is he won't be there to respond. Is there a danger to that for him?
There's somewhat of a danger, but remember, the thread that all of these, or the needle that all these candidates are trying to thread is, I'm Donald Trump's policies without his personality.
Yeah.
And if you attack him to hurt him, then the base is not going to be too happy with you, and the chances of you securing his votes are really null and void. You don't have that opportunity. Remember when Chris Christie to Marco Rubio did the best murder-suicide ever in politics on a debate stage, where he took Rubio out, but he got none of the votes.
Yeah.
And so a lot of people, I think like Chris Christie, don't care about getting Donald Trump supporters. They just want to hurt Donald Trump. But if you do that, you're going to need those supporters he has to move forward, move up, and actually secure the nomination. And remember, everybody on that stage is saying, hey, if you elect me, I promise I'll do what Donald Trump did policy-wise. That may be true, but with the disaster this country is facing right now and how bad Joe Biden has been, do you really want to risk our future on a promise as opposed to someone with a proven record? That's going to be Donald Trump's message, and obviously everyone else is going to have the opposite message.
Hogan, if I could ask you to put your former National Press Secretary hat on for a moment. I mean, you did a yeoman's job during the Trump administration, standing there in the White House, in the briefing room, talking to the media, talking to the press reporters. You look at this news cycle that President Biden has had in the last 2 weeks, from the disastrous fires in Maui and apparently inept reaction on the ground by the Maui government, as well as a very slow response from the federal government. Joe Biden sitting at the beach during the whole thing. Plus, you've got the revelation that he's using a pseudonym to hide his emails when he was vice president, and those very emails copied Hunter Biden, Devin Archer, and were about business in Ukraine, where his son and his family was making millions of dollars. I gotta think pressure would be on you if this were President Trump and all these things were going on. Have you noticed? The media is silent about these things, Hogan.
Of course, and the polls have Donald Trump ahead of Joe Biden nationally in a lot of ways, but think about if the press were honest. Think about if the press were actually curious and asked some of the questions you're pointing out right now and reported on the fact that Hunter Biden and Joe Biden potentially, were involved in some bribery scheme, my goodness, he'd be up by 20 points at this point. Understand, from June 8th to July 18th, research shows 527 minutes dedicated to Donald Trump and indictments, and zero, a big goose egg, dedicated to Hunter Biden and Joe Biden's problems. That's always the uphill battle that the Republicans are going to face. It's unfair, but that's part of the game. That's what made Donald Trump so dangerous, is he used Twitter and other social media platforms without the filter of the mainstream media to give you the message directly, hearing exactly what a president of the United States was thinking at any given moment. Sometimes that was a great thing to have. Sometimes it was more difficult than others. But the fact is, you got to see what was on his mind. The press has been derelict in their duty here for decades in this country. There's a reason their popularity sits somewhere between Congress and COVID. It's because they lie to us consistently. And it's not just about who they prosecute in the media. It's about who they protect. And we have seen a full-scale circling of the wagons around Hunter Biden and Joe Biden. Remember, in that briefing room, we had one or two folks who would ask good questions to the White House. Everybody else was against us. Now it's the exact opposite. Karine Jean-Pierre is the national press secretary, of course, for the Biden administration. But everybody else in that room acts as though they're her deputies, just parroting whatever the administration says without question. And that's a real problem, I think, for the American people.
Popularity between COVID and Congress. I like that. Although, to be honest, Hogan, I watched a little Morning Joe the other day. COVID's looking pretty good right now. Quickly, I know that, yeah, you worked with President Trump, and obviously you're a loyal guy, and he values loyalty, although you are not working on the 2024 campaign. Setting Trump aside for a minute, so far, who's impressing you from this field? You're a comms guy. Who's good at cutting through and communicating and sort of getting their message out?
Look, I think we have a pretty talented field right now. Vivek is obviously kind of the flavor of the month. I don't say that in a negative way. I say that because in these campaigns, typically you have a front runner, and then you have people who kind of raise and lower and go up and go down, and the scrutiny hits them, and then they fall down a few pegs, and someone else steps in. Happened with Santorum and myself in 2012, of course. Look, I think he's hitting all the marks right now. Vivek is defending Donald Trump as he should, but he's also coming forth with his own policy prescriptions. Some of them aren't necessarily popular, but he's trying to kind of cut against the mainstream. And he's doing a pretty good job of that right now, quite frankly. And he has the ability to talk to the high-minded elite crowd with his language and his way of explaining things. Mm-hmm. But then he can go into Iowa at the state fair and talk to the common man, explain to them what he wants to do too, with good simple language and strategy, just like Donald Trump was able to do. He's someone I think you should watch. Tim Scott, my senator from South Carolina, obviously love him too. Yeah. And we'll see where he goes. Right. Those are two I'd keep an eye on. Nikki has an opportunity there, but I think Tim Scott's probably going to beat her in his own home state. But we have just such a talented field right now that it's hard not to see them as so much better than the bench the Democrats have, which is basically Kamala Harris and Pothole Pete. That's all they got.
So no Asa fever for you yet, Hogan Gidley. All right, well, we'll keep an eye.
The draft Asa movement seems to not be coalescing around him as though we thought they would.
Maybe they thought ASA stood for something else. Hogan Gidley, thanks for joining us. We'll be back. More to come on O'Connor Today.